Evening, everybody. This is DrHack, and it's time to cover those weird moves in the Caro-Kann. Let's do this, huh? Now, before we do it, we have to realize that we are coming near the end of the Caro-Kann opening. There's only a couple of things left for us to discuss before we really get into middle games and onward, okay? And that means we need to vote on the next opening that we're going to cover on this channel. This is your time to voice what your opinion is. And I will take those things into heavy consideration. I think I've listened to you guys every time so far. Now, I will guide that a little bit, right? Because, let me check my settings here. Glad I did that. So this is Blitz and Rapid. And this is average on lead chess. So we've got a couple 100 points above average and a couple 100 points below average. Let's add a little bit more to that. Okay. And when we're playing black, right, and they play e4, this is where our Caro-Kann comes in. That's 63% of the games you'll face with black. That's a big percentage, right? Now, the other percentage, the other big one is d4. If we picked an opening that played against d4, like say the Indian defenses or the classical, right, way to play against this, or maybe even a Dutch defense, guys, that could be possible, then I would say that's a really good use of our time. We don't want to start with any gambity openings because we want to learn the deep strategy of chess and outclass our opponents and thus move up through the ranks quickly like that. Okay, so if you're going to recommend a gambit, unless it's overwhelmingly popular, we're probably not doing that. Okay, and the other thing we could do is if we flip this over to White's point of view, remember we're building an opening repertoire with e4. We've already learned what happens if they play e5. Right? That's 45% of your games. That's most of them. Well, it's not most of them yet. So we'd need to learn then a Sicilian, or we need to learn a French defense, or we need to learn a Scandinavian. And we already know a little bit about the Caro-Kann enough to pick an annoying opening out to our opponents. So any of these three, I think, would be ones that we'd want to pick as White. Okay, so in the comments below, which opening do you want to do next? Let's vote. Okay. So the weird moves of move 2 and 3 of the Caro-Kann. Take a minute, first of all. Look at White's point of view and see if you can pick out all the moves that he might try. There are quite a few. Okay, so if you decided that there are several piece moves, because that's what I decided. There's even a queen move, but I'm not really interested in talking about that one so much because I think you guys are advanced enough at this point that you know the fundamental problem of a queen coming into the game too early. And that is that it's worth too much and it will get chased around. We're not going to look at it. But there are also many, many pawn moves, aren't there? Besides these three piece moves, there are pawn moves here and there's a pawn move there. Not d4, that's too normal. There's a c pawn move, maybe even two c pawn moves, right? There's a pawn move here that lets a bishop out that way, and there's a pawn move here that lets There are so many moves on the second move that are weird in the Caro-Kann. Well, we know how to play against the majority of those moves already because of the order that we did this in. This is where you go, DrHack, you're amazing. Yes, thank you, I know. I'm humble too. So when they bring out, let's say, a bishop, let's start with this one. Okay, and we play our Caro-Kann move, which is to put a pawn into the middle of the board. If he should ever take the pawn at d5, this strategy matches the strategy that we learned in video 1. And that strategy was, just to recap, was that this bishop becomes his most important attacking piece. The queen becomes his second most important attacking piece, right? The tier 1 attackers that attack at h7. And that's how the game develops, right? You go back and watch that video again if you want to see the rest of it. Now, you can't visualize that here. It's very hard to see. But if I play just one or two more moves, it's going to become very clear. Okay? Let me just play a couple of moves, and let's play d4 with White. The second that happens, now we can visualize it very easily, isn't it? Imagine this guy disappears for a minute. Put him in your mind up here on f1. If he travels out to d3, oh, and if the queen travels out to h5, oh, right? And if the knight becomes the tier 2 attacker, oh, we've seen this before. This is the same attack, which means if this guy becomes the most important attacking minor piece for White, we can get away with a move like this one because it meshes with the overarching strategy of the game. This then would be a very strong move to get rid of this bishop right now, because then it can't cause us any problems, and we will have equalized the game. Whoa, right? And if he tries to trade this way, well, if we trade the bishops, we've equalized the game. Whoa. Just knowing the strategy, we can play this one. And if you don't want to take it on in a very weird way, if you decide that knight a5 isn't your cup of tea, which it's a great way to equalize the game, you could just put the bishop out here and just get prepared. You know that this is the biggest attack. You know where it's coming and how it's going to come there. So let's just move on with the game. You know this one, guys. So now let's take this back then. So if the bishop coming there, it's not a bad move for white, but it's just something that we already understand. What if he decided to bring the knight in first? Well, anytime the two pawns trade here, we already know the strategy. Video 1, right? Go back to it if you have to. But what happens if it doesn't trade? What happens if he pushes past? You know what I'm going to say before I say it, don't you? Video 3. This is the closed Caro-Kann. This pawn is eventually going to come up here to d4, and the pawns are going to get closed. And we already know the strategy that goes along with that one. These are the two places where the attack's going to come. And we need to defend those with everything we've got. If the bishop doesn't make it out here, we remember it's not a good idea to castle over there if your bishop's not able to defend h7. Wow, right? So we already know this one too then. Both of the options, if he takes it, we know what to do. If he pushes past, we know what to do. What if he doesn't do either of those things? Well, the flexibility of what he has here, he could take this and put it into our strategy from video 1, and he could push past and put it into our strategy from video 3 anytime he wants to, which means we have to remain flexible. So we play a move like this one, knowing full well that we're not going to take that knight. We know it, he knows it, right? So when he plays this move, we're definitely moving back. But we know now that if he takes this one, we know what's happening here. We do. We just do. We are playing now against this piece. We got our bishop in the right place. We just got to make sure we don't get checkmated on accident on the way there. Right? So moves like this now are very interesting for him, and moves like this now are very interesting for us. And if he takes it, we get to go party in the streets. We know this one. I had a viewer write me and say, hey, I've been losing games because I've been partying in the streets too much. Well, you know what? That's fine. That's a good way to lose a game. Just trust me on this. It's much better for life in general. Okay, so we kind of know a lot of this stuff already. Let's see one that we don't know already. Okay, let's check this one. And remember, if we were ever to trade off the e-pawn, go back to video 1 and see what that was. Now, actually, this one happens to be not video 1. If we trade these off, this happens to be video 2. Right? Because if the pawn travels up to here, this is exactly that position that we studied in video 2. And we know from that our opponent here is a very aggressive opponent, because what he gave up, right, in order to make this attack happen was pawn structure. He gave up something very big and very important. And so when these two pawns trade, we notice that there's nothing here with pawns, there's nothing here with pawns, which means these two guys stand alone. They're isolated. And that means that we should build up an attack on those, because every time we put a piece to attack them and our opponent puts a piece to defend them, that's worse for our opponent, because defending makes you very passive, and you're going to make mistakes and lose material. If you're the attacker, you make mistakes and you don't lose material. We would much rather be the attacker. Okay. So in this one, we could absolutely put our queen into the middle of the game right now. I'm going to recommend that you don't do that, but that's just me, because that's a fundamental flaw, and we know that one, right? I would much rather take that back with something that is not a queen, like a minor piece. I would much rather do this. And I would much rather than wait for my opponent to try to tell me if he's going to save the pawn or not save the pawn. There's only one way that he can try to save the pawn, guys, for real. Okay, watch this. If he gives us a check, and we said, okay, he gave us a check, let's block it. We don't want to lose the game. And then he decides that he's going to defend the pawn now, because it's only attacked one time now. Okay, good, let's defend it. Done. And if we're playing, to win this pawn, we're going to have to get rid of the pin. So let's do these 2 moves to get rid of the pin. And now let's bring the knight out to b6, and we all of a sudden see that we've got 3 pieces all of a sudden attacking here. That's more than he's got defending it. Now he's got a problem, right? So he's got to defend it again. And we've got a 4th piece that can attack it right now, and he does not have a 4th defender. So we can overpower this pawn because of how far it is into the game and because it doesn't have any other pawns that can defend it. Okay, so you can do this multiple ways to get that pawn back. This one is my favorite way to do it. I probably gave you too much there. You probably should do it however you find the most creative way you can think of to do it, because that makes chess better. Okay, great. So we kind of know that our opponent's aggressive and that he's giving up pawn structure for this attack. Okay, well, what if he doesn't do that? What if he plays some other weird move here instead of taking our pawn? Well, he's got to defend this pawn, so I suppose he's only got a couple of options. And we see something like this happen, and we go, why can't we just go full send on this one and just go after him and just attack and win the game because we have more space than he does? I think we can completely turn the table upside down on this. Remember how he had the idea that he could play his pawn forward and make it the advanced variation and kind of cramp our stuff? Well, what am I looking at here, guys? What are we looking at? We're looking at a position where we have a pawn on the 4th row that's anchored in by more pawns. We have the space advantage now big time. This is unusual for black. This is an advantage in the opening. How did that happen, right? And so we just need to worry about how we play this now, okay? And that is that this bishop is your worst one. He is running into these pawns all over the place. And if you could trade him off the board before you closed everything up and played this game, and played on one of the wings, whatever wing you chose, I think that would be ideal. This is the ideal situation for you, because you're forcing a piece to go in the way and you're forcing that to come off the board. Okay. So we can take this on, you know, if he does start to do some really weird stuff and just lets us have opportunities, well, let's take the opportunities that they give us. Great. So we can handle that one. Is there anything we can't handle? I don't think there is, you know, because even if they do something super duper weird that you would never expect to see in any Caro-Kann anywhere in the world, if they ever take the pawn, we know exactly what's going on. We know enough to be getting along with now. We know the big strategies when these pawns trade and when these pawns push past. And that's where I'm going to leave this one. Hope this helps somebody. Don't forget to vote. You guys take care. Bye now.